The following information is background and analysis of the specific types of information that were being looked for on the midterm exam for CLNR 525 medical ethics in the fall of 2018. One thing I just want to highlight is highlighted in yellow here. It does indicate a maximum of 10 pages double-spaced. If people did go over that, there was a deduction, and if it was not double-spaced, it was a deduction. Reason being, if you're not double-spaced, you can get a lot more information in than someone who did double-spaced, so that's why it has to be set up as a fair type system. Just to go over these very quickly, first few questions are worth 5 points each. And first one was talking about issues required institutional review. There are three specific issues. One is selection criteria, informed consent, and recruitment. So basically, was looking for some of those. IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications, disapprove research. A couple of people did add things such as looking at adverse events and things like that, which is fine, but that's not really a requirement for the IRB. Many times the IRB is going to be looking at the methods and protocol, and what will happen is that they'll be reporting of adverse events because they may not have that information yet, depending on what phase the specific clinical trial is in. So really looking specifically at the selection criteria that they have, remember, based on human research, not on the drug itself, selection criteria, informed consent, and recruitment. The next one was looking at informed consent, looking at people understanding the document. This was kind of broad and was really looking at people talking about, the level of reading and, having it make sure that it's at the appropriate level. It should not be at a, graduate school level of understanding and reading level. The comprehension of information is different. Just because someone reads it doesn't mean they comprehend it. Primary language of the patient can be a concern when we're looking at understanding the document, literacy, sometimes the length of forms and things like that. Those are just some of the items. Again, it really depended on how it was presented by each of you. And again, as I mentioned early on in the semester, it's how it's presented and your specific way of your insights into how it is done. So sometimes if you just stated something, I really couldn't grasp what you were trying to accomplish if you just make a statement without giving some insights as to why you feel that way and support it with different items we've talked about in class or in the book or research outside of those two items. Ethical issues that are addressed during drug discovery and development process. These were specific to one of the lectures that were provided. Some of you did get a little bit involved in talking about phase 1 and phase 2. So I'll remind everyone, please read the question itself. This does not ask about phase 1 or phase 2. It specifically asks about drug discovery and drug development process. So I greatly appreciated the information, but that information really had no relationship to what the question was asking. Describe the evaluation process for the principle of clinical exposé. And this is something that actually is in the reading, and it is set up in a couple of different locations. So the hope was that people would take a look specifically broadly at this item. And really it looks at a number of items. A lot of it deals with randomized clinical trials, talking about optimal care, clinical trial care, that the researcher should not be looking at something that has a better outcome than something else. Another treatment should not be inferior to the standard care. But one of the items that was there is that part of this does deal with the idea of using an inferior treatment, which is a placebo. So this specific item also tries to address that. So, but again, this is in the reading in 3 or 4 different locations. So if you read just one of them, you may not have gotten the full grasp across all of that. The next item, these are worth 10 points, the question 5. Ethical concerns with healthy volunteers was primarily looking at the fact that they will not benefit from it. They can have the risk of being exposed to harm, so to speak. They have to be careful with vulnerable populations and how they may be used with that. And, just, early phase safety type items with vaccinations. A healthy volunteer is actually getting that vaccination. So it's really looking at risk and benefit from that standpoint. Next question 6 was worth 20 points. This is pretty straightforward from a standpoint of what you're looking at in the areas of, obviously, the 3 main areas that we use in clinical research today: the Belmont Report, Declaration of Helsinki, and the Nuremberg Code. So it was really specifically looking at, for Belmont, the 3 items: Declaration of Helsinki and Nuremberg. You did not have to list all 6 or all 10. But you did have to have some information that's related to items, so that if you talked about Declaration of Helsinki, you should have at least indicated somewhere that this was geared towards the medical community. Nuremberg is geared towards the human experimentation. So they're geared differently in how they're really looked at from that standpoint. Again, all the items here you can find very easily in the book or any research you do online from that standpoint. Similarities, that they are protect human subjects to minimize harm. Differences, again, Helsinki is really looking at those who are providing the research. Belmont was used to also help clarify the other 2. That's another difference from that standpoint. Question 7 was a case study looking at the Quinn artificial heart case. Was really looking for some good information from you as far as looking at the case. Some of you may have gone online and picked one item, just read one item. That's a little concern for me. When you're at this level, what you should be trying to do is find different perspectives. Some are news-based, some may be from lawyers who are on one side or the other side. There's a lot of information out there. And so the idea is not necessarily to take one thing from an article in a newspaper that was online, but really look broadly across it. So a number of items that are here, depending on how you presented it. The inclusion criteria was 30 days to live. That's obviously pretty intense from that standpoint. A lot of you commented about what you were reading regarding the informed consent document, that perhaps it wasn't provided well enough from that standpoint. And it may or may not be. We don't know that. That's the whole thing. We were not there. But because the informed consent document did have statements such as that the patient may die on the table, that's pretty much giving you the biggest risk you can have. So there's a lot of things that go on within this area. You can see the other list of items that here. A lot of you talk about once you're in this, you can't withdraw. Absolutely. Initially, Quinn said he wanted to be a research pioneer, but after he went through all that, maybe he shouldn't have really been thinking that way. A number of you commented on the issues that are dealing with the specifics that may not have been in the right frame of mind. And so that's absolutely true. And Mrs. Quinn may not have either. They may have heard the information. We do know at times that people will hear things and only listen to what's going to be positive versus negative. So a lot of this is there. The one thing that I really didn't find many picking up on is the patient advocate itself was actually employed by the artificial heart company. That's a pretty big conflict right there. And a lot of people said, well, it's not successful because he didn't live. Well, success criteria was live longer than if you don't have a transplant. So you got 30 days to live, you have the transplant in 10 days, you live longer than 20 days, you've actually lived longer than what you would have without it. So that's kind of thing. And also being that he's only the 5th person in the study, I think is an important item to really understand. That means he was very early on in the overall process from that standpoint. So we do that. I did want to give you an update. I don't know if any of you saw this or anything that way. Again, this is a few years old, but I think it's a good case. Once this was said and done, that Mrs. Quinn agreed to settle for $125,000. A third of that amount will go to the law firm. So it's interesting when you think about it. It's $125,000 from all of the defendants. She did not sue the surgeon because she felt he was very good to them, always talking to them and giving them information and things of that nature. So kind of interesting from that perspective. Then lastly, the last question worth 25 points, which was about Dr. Roberts and her case, working with a specific company, Arthrid, and there's a number of conflict of interest. And one of you mentioned the fact that, well, conflict of interest is really listed in week 7, and that's actually true. We talked about conflict of interest a little bit, but one of the items I think is important at a graduate level is that when you're given information to take a look at, that you dig through and find things. It's not, an ethics course is not regurgitation, here's what I read, and this is it. It's really thinking through and providing your perspectives and leveraging the knowledge you have as to why you provide that perspective. So there's a number of items that many of you caught across this. The idea that the amount of money she was getting, 5% common stock for her family, stock offered to Dr. Chung, IRB members who actually own stock in the company. Again, that's a huge issue to take a look at from that standpoint. The dean of the school, the dean of the college, indicating the importance of the study, for the school to the IRB. Again, that's not something you want to see happening from that standpoint. And so there's a number of items that that many of you found, from that standpoint. So these are the key items. Again, many of you found others, which is great. From there, you do not have to list every single one of these to have full points on the question. So that's kind of an overview of the exam. In the information that I wrote back to everybody, you have through the date that was listed on the email back to you. If you have any questions about the exam, I do not go back over the exam after that date. So if you have any questions, make sure you look at them today and get through them. I did also send out information about the overall performance. Again, the range is from 56 to 93. 84 is the mean, the arithmetic mean for the group. And again, I did say there's a number of people who lost points because of not being double spaced or long. Without that, the mean would have been up in the probably 88, 89 range. So with that, I thank you very much. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to email me. Be happy to get information back to you. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great evening.